Good morning. Can you hear me all right? My eyesight has never been good. I told you about trying to get a driver's license in Pennsylvania. And they have state police there who are administering the test. And it was this fine gentleman, fully garbed in his uniform, who was my tester. And I looked in the little machine and told him what I saw. And I heard the casters on his chair rolling, and I looked up, and he's rolling back, and he said, "You drove in here, Father." And I don't hear very well anymore either, and you've certainly experienced that when you try to ask questions, and I really apologize for that. But anyway, I'm glad to see you, and I can see you in case you're wondering about that. In fact, I see everybody here with cookies and coffee and everything, and I think something's wrong with this. I can't get a level service to a coffee cup. It always spills if I put it up here. Anyhow, let me talk about pictures just for a moment because that gets me off beat otherwise. First of all, page 1 is the cliff, they call it, because it's rather steep and they call it a cliff. The cliff at Qumran. And if you're looking for the opening of the cave, start looking down at the left-hand side. About 2/3 the way down, you'll see a slot of black. That's the opening to the cave. That's been enlarged by archaeologists so they could get inside. This is Cave 12, Qumran Cave 12. The only way they can get there is by having climbers equipment, anchoring things in rocks and pulling on them and holding on to them. And then they have to rappel down. Anyway, they're somewhat athletic archaeologist, I think. But that's Cave 12. You can see why it showed up kind of late in the story of the Dead Sea Scrolls. You could hardly find it. It was what they call a rabbit hole prior to that. That's page 1. In Cave 12, there were no scrolls. They're now saying, and by the way, Cave 12 also connects to Cave. This is 52 in just counting Qumran caves, but it's Cave 12 of the Qumran caves. Adjacent to this and accessible from this is Cave. This is 52. There's Cave 53, and then there's Cave 53A and 53B. So this is a chain of caves, and way up 675 feet from the Dead Sea level. So you're 675 feet up in the air, up this cliff, they call it. It's very steep. That's page 1. Page 2, you have a Dead Sea Scroll jar reconstructed. If you look closely, you'll see 1, 2, 3 pieces I see, but it was actually more than that. All they found in Cave 12 was smashed jars. When Cave 12 was plundered, they were in a hurry. They wanted only the scrolls. The jars have no real value. And they were smashed to get the scrolls because the scrolls were rather tightly into the jars. Let's move on. We're going to go now all the way to page. Well, we're going to go a long way here. Okay, page 6. On the left-hand side of the page, you have to look closely because it looks like it's 2/3 black space. This is inside the cave, and there's a artificial light focused on a pile of shards of jars. These are the pieces of jars of scrolls that were found, but no scroll. This cave has been plundered because there are two pickaxe heads in the thing that have cast iron casting dates on them of 1940. It tells us that there was sometime at or after 1940 that the plunder took place. And apparently they intended to come back or something because they left the pickaxes there. Then on page 7, you will see what looks like a bad picture, and it is. But this is just a camera's view. If you get too far away, you can't see the openings. So in the section where we can see the openings, this is the way. There's 600 plus caves in and around north and south of Qumran, and they are like this, and more of them than we thought have had scrolls in them. And then finally, here's a team, not very large, 4 people you can see here, 5 maybe, working in Cave 12. That's on page 8. Working in Cave 12. And look closely and you'll see what looks like a small bucket there on the right side of the picture. In archaeological work, everything is put in a bucket. There's no dirt tossed on the ground. Everything you dig, everything you move goes into a bucket, and the bucket is sifted to find whatever kind of antiquity or piece of antiquity or parts of scroll jars are in the dirt you've dug away. What we learned in Cave 12, and I'm getting into the text here now, but you can go home and read it. It'll make more sense when you read it. What we've learned at Cave 12 is that you can't just go into the cave with a lantern, or better still now, one of our LED flashlights, and scan around, and if you see nothing, you simply say, well, there's nothing here. That's the way the caves were investigated in 1946 to 1957, and then the sweep subsequent to that. That's the way they were done. And if you didn't see anything, you assumed there were no scrolls there. But if we were in Jerusalem, I would tell you that. If we were in Jerusalem, I would tell you that the streets Jesus walked are 12 feet under the streets we're walking now, because there have been layers of civilization in Jerusalem. It's been totally occupied. Even after war, it's been occupied and rebuilt and occupied and rebuilt and occupied and rebuilt, so that the street level that you walk on is very often as much as 12 feet below you. Nobody thought that the caves were living areas also in this devilishly hot and dry region of the Dead Sea. The caves were cool, and people used these for residences. They didn't have air conditioners to put vents in their homes, and so that they lived in these caves. And so while they're not 12 feet deep, you finally have to do more than scratch the surface to decide whether there's anything we're interested in this cave. Cave 12 has now had 4 years of excavation, actually down in the ground. More than that, there's 2 dug tunnels in Cave 12. And they're dug by somebody for some reason, and we'll talk about that when I get to more text. So then finally, page 8, page 9, you've seen this picture often before. and there's a reason. This is Cave 4, in Qumran Cave 4. This had the mother lode of fragments and antiquities in Cave 4. And you can get pretty close to this cave, except for this ravine that wraps around it, which you can see to the left side. And this picture is here today because you've seen this several times before. This picture is here today because of the ravine, and to show you the depth of that ravine. That ravine is really deep, and what it is Wadi Qumran. We talk about Wadi Qumran all the time. Wadi means river or stream bed, because frequently in the Holy Land and in the area of the Dead Sea, remember, it's incredibly dry. It's incredibly desert-like. Look at the absence of grass. Well, anyway, I wanted you to look at this ravine as this sizable mountain. This hole at the top is not original. This hole was cut to get down into Cave 5. Not even archaeologists wanted to rappel down the side of this thing to get into this door, so they made one at the top and lowered themselves into it. At any rate, it is high, and you can see some of that depth here, and that's why it's here. You remember in the 4th verse of the 23rd Psalm. Now, I didn't remember the 4th verse of the 23rd Psalm. The 23rd Psalm, I know. I didn't know it. I had to go look it up. 4th verse says, "Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, thou art with me." Psalm 23, verse 4. When most of the year, by the way, I've been to Israel 2 times in the spring, and I never go again, because it rains like almighty you know what. And I had a group on a bus one time, and pouring down rain that you could not see something as big as the amphitheater at Caesarea. But I had one person about this tall on the bus, who was a physical therapist, by the way, could throw me against the wall, so I never argued with her. She says, "I don't know whether I'll ever come to the Holy Land again, and I'm going to go to that amphitheater, and I'm going to climb to the top." It was raining harder than I can describe. And I thought, well, I'm the leader of this group. I got to go there. And I had a pretty nice raincoat, I thought. So she and I, only 2, went up to the very top of the amphitheater at Caesarea. Some of you have been there. You know what I'm talking about. You could not see. It's right on the side. Your backdrop of the amphitheater is the Mediterranean Sea. You could not see the Mediterranean Sea in this rain. You could hardly see the bottom of the amphitheater when you got to the top. We got back to the bus, and even my underwear was soaked wet. In 2 hours, I was totally dry. This is the Holy Land. Well, Dead Sea is the Holy Land times 10. And therefore, these caves are cool. So people live there. So over these 2,000 years, they've found the remnants of sleeping mats and other such things. But you got to go down to find them. And when you go down, they found the jars, or the shards of the jars, in Cave 12. This is the 4th year of that dig. They don't dig all year. They try to pick a season that's more tolerable than the Dead Sea, but anyway, that's there. Back to the Psalm 23, verse 4. "Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, thou art with me." Now imagine, in most of the season, if there's any grass for the shepherds to eat, it'll be in the shaded areas. And as the sun sweeps, this area down here is shaded. So the shepherd, looking for grass for the sheep to eat, goes down there. But sheep are dumb. They don't watch the clouds. So, to be called a sheep of the Lord is not necessarily an intellectual compliment. Here in this wadi, the water builds up. In 20 minutes, it can be 10 feet deep. This wadi runs 30 miles all the way down to Masada. Now, if you got sheep down there, the shepherd is never watching the sheep. The shepherd is always doing this. Because when the cloud moves over this area, it's almost too late to get a herd of sheep out. David was a shepherd boy. Psalm 23, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, thou art with me. You got to go down there for the grass, but you got to get out when the clouds start approaching. Shadow of death. I thought that there because that's the way I can describe what I think maybe Psalm 23 verse 4 is talking about. Then finally on the last page, a page you've seen before, you see this wadi coming down in the map at the bottom. You see the bright place at up 2/3 of the way up to the top, and then the wadi goes west. But it also comes down all the way just about to Masada, 29 miles away. And you can follow this depression. One other thing, we're on the last page. I'm going to, with your permission, and I'll probably do it anyway, I'm going to switch up the Barkokba line, which is scheduled for the 22nd of October, up to next week, and drop next week down to the 22nd. I didn't retype all that. Now, let me put my page back in order. The Lord be with you. Then let us pray. Father, lead us through the conversation here. Give us excitement about what we're learning. Give us excitement about what the church is learning and science is learning, and our Jewish brothers and sisters are learning as well. And we'll talk about that too. In Jesus' name. Well, until rather recently, we could say the 11 scrolls of Qumran, because for 60 years, that's how many caves we thought were involved in this Dead Sea discovery until 2017, or really a little before that, 1998, when the first hint that something was going on in Cave 52, which is now Qumran Cave 12. We thought for 50 years, 60 years, that we had what was to be found. There had been sweeps done by the Jordanians, and I'll talk about that in a minute too. There have been sweeps done by the Jordanians because this was originally Jordanian territory. And the Dead Sea Scrolls, it's on their land. It belongs to the Jordanians. So the first scrolls discovered, and some of the very significant ones, are not in the Israeli Museum, but in the museum in Amman, Jordan. That's where they are. That's where they'll stay. Somewhere I've heard the statement, possession is 9/10 of the law, and it works this way here as well. So we don't even know how many the Jordanians have, because they haven't, I don't know, they're the Jordanians. So as a result of that, we thought, and the Jordanians thought, for 60 years, that we had what was to be found. And suddenly, Cave 12 burst upon us, and the realization that the plundering of these scrolls may have been longer and wider than we ever had any imagination. We will probably never know. For example, how many scrolls were here? Well, there's shards to put together 7 jars. So there were 7 jars there. Therefore, logic, 7 scrolls. We don't know who they were, what they were. We don't know whether they're biblical. We don't know whether they were prophetic. In other words, one of the prophets, they frequently were, for what we know. But we don't know about Cave 12. Cave 12 is also a long way away. Archaeologists who are rappelling down and climbing up with mountain climbing gear to get to the cave, wondering how they lugged jugs up there. Because it's not just the scroll, it's the heavy clay jug, and that thing's as tall as I am. So, how did they get it up there? Or did they assemble them up there, take them up in pieces? We'll never know some of those things. Anyhow, we've learned if you dig deep enough, you can find some things we didn't see the first time we swept the caves. So there's 600 plus caves in this region. We now know that they were further away from Qumran than we thought, both in access, look at the steepness of this, both at the access and in mileage distance or meters distance. So this is a whole new awakening for us, both understanding how serious the plundering may have been, and probably is, and we're going to get to that in a minute. We're going to read about that for a minute. So, this is Cave 12. Welcome to Cave 12. And next Sunday, I'll go to Cave 12 plus 53A and B, which are attached to Cave 12, because they're called the Caves of Haram, and they take us to 150 years after the dissolution, we think, of the Essenes during the Bar Kokhba era. Now, I've mentioned Bar Kokhba several times. He led after the destruction of Jerusalem in 70, the Jews rose a second time out of centered in Bethlehem under the leadership of one by the name of Bar Kokhba, Bar being son of Kokhba, and Bar being always son, or Ben, same kind of thing. So I want to do it because they're together, and we'll be picking up some of this as we go there, and that'll work better. Bar Kokhba's rebellion started 130 to 137. Now Jerusalem was destroyed by the Romans in 70, so this is a second insurrection in 100, no, not 100, 70 years later. So, and it lasted long enough to mint their own coins. And in this cave, they have found Bar Kokhba coins, which tells us that they used it as a refugee thing. And I'll tell you right now, it's called Cave of Horrors because there were 70 skeletons found here. What does that tell us? It could tell us more about Masada, which was 70 CE. Anyhow, 70 BCE. So anyway, just hold this all together. We had a history professor in seminary who wrote on a chalkboard with one hand and had the eraser in the other. And if you were slow in writing, taking notes, you could lose 12 centuries, or just like that. There's a little of this going on here, too, and you try to tie this together week to week to week. But what was it like? Let's talk about the Middle East, the Far East, not the Far East, the Middle East. It is a turbulent place. Has been a turbulent place for a long time. When World War II was over, Palestine was still under the British mandate, under which it was placed by the winning side of World War I, when the British Mandate put much of the Middle East was put under the British Mandate. Why? Because Turkey and the Middle East sided with the Germans. So the Western nations put the Middle East under a British mandate to try to keep the lid on this crazy place. Well, 1945 brought the end, didn't just bring the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls, but it was also the year that the war ended, the Second World War. We are still under the British mandate trying to keep peace. Nobody in the Middle East liked the British. The British, only the Jordanians, and that's another story. Jordan is not a biblical nation. Jordan was created when the British mandate moved out, and they gave it as a gift to the king's family, the Hashemite king, because he had given them the least trouble in the mandate. That's to cut history very short and put it in a small box. So Jordan is English is a second language in Jordan. Had been first, as long as the British were there, when Arabic was second. Now they're kind of, if you buy anything in Jordan, the direction label will be in British, in English, and in Arabic. Today. Anyway, so Jordan gets created as the British move out, and it becomes the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan. But we're coming now into 1945, where our story starts, is where the war is ending. What is happening in the world? First of all, the war is over. There's all kind of celebration and all kind of confusion, but in the Middle East, there is its own kind of package of problems. After World War I, Jews began to migrate back to the Holy Land. They did it legitimately. They bought farmland, and the Arab owners of all the land were happy to get the Western money, and so they were happy to sell these farms. And there was formed the kibbutz, the group form, the kibbutzim in plural in Hebrew, kibbutzim, kibbutz, kibbutzim, still exist today. They're a great industry, and they do much of the agriculture, not only in Galilee, but in Samaria, which was West Bank as well. When World War II is over, and the terrible Holocaust, 6 million Jews, and the terrible Holocaust is over, there were Jews who said, we're going home. We're never going to trust anybody to protect us again. You've heard of Felix Mendelssohn? Mendelssohn is a Jewish name, but he's a Lutheran because you couldn't get a job, and this is the Middle Ages, you couldn't get a job if you were Jewish. So Jews said in masses, we're never going to trust anybody again. We'll take care of ourselves, thank you. And this migration, and you know, you probably don't remember, at the beginning of World War II, there was an out-migration as well. And ships arrived at Western ports, one of them New York, filled with people fleeing the Third Reich, and they weren't permitted to disembark. That's history. So when World War II was over, they said, We're not going to trust anybody to take care of us anymore. We will take care of ourselves, thank you. And they started a migration home. For the Arabs well, once again, after the Third Reich's terrible Holocaust, some few that survived went home only to find the home had been sold to somebody else. So that they said, we'll go home. The only thing was, they haven't lived there in mass now for a long time. And so it isn't theirs anymore. Now they pay for it because they could. They bought the farms because they could, and they did it after World War I to start it. And it was a movement that started from there. I just read in the newspaper this morning, from Friday's newspaper, that I finally got off the front porch after I finished this paper. That President Biden's border program is simply being overwhelmed by refugees. People are shot in the southern states because they're refugees. The same thing happened. The guns came out in Palestine in the late 40s. And it was Jew versus Arab. This is when we're struggling with the black market of the uncontrolled, unlicensed products of the Dead Sea Scrolls. You say, why did it happen? I got a section here of plundering. Why did the plundering happen? It happened because nobody was in charge. You could be a professor at the University of Toilet Bowl West and go to Israel and start digging and bring home what you got. And the scrolls were no different. If you go to the Philadelphia Museum, I haven't been there now, I shouldn't say this. When I last went to the Philadelphia Museum, which was about 30 years ago, Merenoptah's he was a pharaoh of Egypt. His throne room is standing in the University of Pennsylvania Museum, totally, along with hundreds of mummies in cases never on public display at the University Museum, because one of our archaeologists brought them home. He brought home the throne room too. History is, in archaeology, there were some, now looking at it in retrospect, they were some of our worst thieves. Plundering has been going on a long time. Am I saying it's all right? Absolutely not. But it's, museums want to be collections of heritage from around the world. You either got to buy it or go dig it. And it was possible to dig it when I first started visiting the Holy Land, possible to dig it without a license. Just bring your shovel. So, 1940, all of this is going on, and there's no control. There's no agreement. It will be the late 40s, 46, 47, when Israel finally, by the UN and by their proclamation, becomes a sovereign state, a sovereign territory. And the West Bank was supposed to be too, but it was rejected by the Arabs. So, because to create Israel made you have to do this to the people that are there. It's not surprising that they didn't like it. This is the state of affairs at the time of this first development of the Dead Sea Scrolls. The black market was in charge. Anybody could dig. Well, I've said enough. I just wanted to understand there was almost no government here. When Doris and I started going to Israel and the West Bank and Jordan, we would drive in from the airport at Tel Aviv, about an hour's drive, 45-minute drive to Jerusalem. All along the road, there are military vehicles, smashed, but painted in red lead paint and just left there, so that nobody forgets the fight that there was in the 40s to come home. They're still there. It was just terrible, and nobody was really in charge. It wasn't Jordanian territory. It had been Turkish territory before World War I, and that, remember the British Mandate, that was never resolved. And when the Brits moved out, there was essentially not much. So Israel declares itself a sovereign nation on the day the British Mandate leaves, in accordance with the division of Palestine designed by the United Nations. Well, that's the circumstance that's going on. Now what's happening? From 1946, 7 until about, until 1967, this is Jordanian territory, because when Israel was formed, the United Nations appointed Jordan as the caretaker of the West Bank, which was the other part that the United Nations had set aside. Jordan annexed it and made it part of Jordan. So now, from the time of 46, 47 until 67, the 67 war, Israel has declared itself a sovereign nation. It has no friends. There was almost constantly a war started by Egypt, Samaria, what am I trying to say? Lebanon, Syria, what I'm trying to say. One or the other decides to take out a gripe against Israel. Israel became then one of the strongest military powers in the Middle East, and still is. But finally, on Shabbat, a Sabbath day, a festival day, when even the military is not on duty, all 5 of the neighbors do a pincer on Israel. Israel returned the compliment. They survived. Returned the compliment a year or two later, when they saw the armaments building on all sides. Israel struck first. It's called the 67th War. In 67, Israel conquered the Sinai, the Gaza Strip, the Golan Heights in Syria, East Jerusalem, because Jerusalem had been divided, and the West Bank, all of it. Israel still occupies all of those places except Sinai. Sinai was returned as a means to make peace with Egypt. There's now peace with Egypt and Jordan. Although to this day you can go to the Jordan River. Now that you can do that, you could do that because that was the dividing line between Israel and Jordan. And there was a 10-mile no man's land, 5 on each side, that was mined the way apparently some parts of Ukraine are mined now. And Jordan has swept out the mines. It's over. Jordan has Bethany beyond Jordan, where the baptismal site is, was part of the demilitarized zone. Well, it wasn't. It was mined, which King Hussein gave to the churches, as a baptism site, and there's a whole bunch of little Christian cathedrals now all over what used to be a minefield in Jordan. But on the Israeli side, you drive through the minefield, there's a road put through it with a chain link fence saying don't go beyond this point. And when you get to the baptism site where you can go from Israeli side to the river, on each side of you, there's a gun emplacement in case the Jordanians change their mind and decide to swim across the river. Now, it's a crazy place. And now that we have 2 civilized nations, I'm not sure Israel's civilized anymore, but 2 civilized nations who say we're not at war, it's not really at peace either. If you think anti-Semitism is bad here, go there. The first Dead Sea Scrolls that came into Israeli hands were bought in New York City in an ad. We already know that story. In an ad published in the New York Times, or was it the Wall Street Journal? I don't remember. But a classified ad for Dead Sea Scrolls in New York City that happened to be seen by the leading Israeli general, Yigiel Yadin, who happened to be giving a lecture tour in New York, and caught this in the New York Times, arranged through a Gentile intermediary to buy the scrolls. And the reason they're being sold in New York is because the person who had bought them in Israel didn't want to sell them to a Jew. Anti-Semitism. It is a disease, and it's been around us for, well, Hitler made a living on it for a while. So this is what it was like. So from 47 to 67, this is Jordanian territory. The scrolls are Jordanian property. After the 67 war, when the Sinai had been captured, and the West Bank as well, it came into Israeli hands. Ever since then, and by the way now, it is in Israeli hands, and Israel has made of Qumran an Israeli national park. So it's again the old law, possession is 9/10 of the law. And the Dead Sea Scrolls, most of them, are in the Shrine of the Book in the museum in Jerusalem. That's 47 to 6, that's 20 years where they were. Now since then they've been, and in the original division, the west side of the Jordan River after Jericho was part of the Israel of the partition. So Israel got, that's a whole other discussion. Having said that, I'm going to turn you and our narrator here to page 3. Actually, I think page begins on page 2. I'm looking at page 4 here. I didn't get them all in order. Page 2, I think it starts. And if you'll turn to page 2 at the bottom, we'll go from there.
That said, the plundering might have been much, much earlier. The Times of Israel, in an article carrying the byline of a man of partial time, dated 24th January
here, let me interrupt you just a second, if you will, Sylvia. What, when she writes, the reporter writes this eerily reflects 1780. The scrolls were bought by a Syriac priest, Orthodox priest, in 1945, and sold in New York in order to avoid selling them to a Jew. Okay, go ahead.
This prompted the director of the K-12 dig, Dr. Gordon, the director of the K-50 excavation, to respond. The Bedouin were not the first ones to find the scrolls in 1947, said Dr. Gordon. No one speaks with greater authority than Dr. Gordon, an archaeologist at Israel's Hebrew University Institute of Archaeology and director of the excavation of K-52. Therefore, we shall let him conclude this section of the paper. Quote, this exciting excavation is the closest we've come to discovering new Dead Sea Scrolls in 60 years. Until now, it was accepted that Dead Sea Scrolls were found in only 11 caves at Qumran. But now there is no doubt that this is the 12th cave. Although at the end of the day no scroll was found, and instead we only found a piece of parchment rolled up in a jug that was in the process of hiding, the findings indicate beyond any doubt that the cave contained scrolls that were stolen. The findings include the jars in which the scrolls and their coverings were hidden, the leather strap for binding the scroll, the cloth that wrapped the scroll's tendons and pieces of skin connecting fragments, and more.
Now I'm looking at the clock. Let me take you to page 7. I called your attention to the picture there at page 7 because when you look at this region, it's just a honeycomb of caves. There are thought to be 600 plus. That is to say, nobody has counted past 600, but there are many. So it's logical to ask, and I ask it, what's being done? What's being done to salvage for posterity whatever caves may yet have scrolls? Some things have changed. Israel has always had an interest in anything that proves they were in the Holy Land, because the misinformation that's been scattered by official sources in the Holy Land is that the Jews never ever had a substantial presence in the Holy Land. Well, the Dead Sea Scrolls are a swift answer to that. And so this has been of tremendous interest to the Israelis. They have a licensing system now. You can't go to Israel with a shovel packed in your suitcase anymore. You can't go and start digging without a license from the Department of Antiquities in Israel anymore. So what's been done? First of all, somebody's in control. The second thing is, notice something else. You might have caught it. There is a co-director at Cave 12, an American, an Israeli. Curiously, interestingly enough, the co-director from the United States is a member of the faculty at Liberty University, of all places, the correspondence school of the world. and he is a priest who specializes in Jewish literature. He is one of the co-directors. Another co-director is a member of the Department of Antiquities. Nobody digs in Israel without the supervision of the Division of Antiquities. Nobody. That was not true for 20 years. That was not true when I started going. I never dug that way. I've been to a few of them, dug in one of them, but that was long since after the rules had changed. You can still buy antiquities in antiquity shops that are licensed by, guess what, the Department of Antiquity. So nothing is dug and carried home anymore. Nothing is dug and carried to the black market anymore. That's the first two things that are really different, and it's been different since the 67 war, when in this case Qumran came under the direction of the Israelis. The process, there's several issues involved now. That license must be renewed every year. And if you've dug a previous year, you must write a report of the previous dig and renew your license at the same time. What we're saying is nothing gets under the radar anymore. That doesn't stop thieves from digging in these undug caves, because it's going to take several years. Actually, this Department of Antiquities established this policy 6 years ago, just when the first rumor of Cave 12 came to light. So it was kind of said, we're not going to do it that way anymore. So have we gotten some control about it? Finally, who do these things belong to? They belong to everybody. And in the care of a professional caretaker at a museum or this kind of thing, they can be several places. How prevalent is it? There are still black markets. We talked about this earlier. The Bible Museum in Washington, D.C. got embroiled in this whole mess because they got caught up in an illegal, fraudulent sale of Dead Sea fragments. Now, because they were not authorities, they didn't know when this thing came to light, and they had to do the right thing, and they did, and that was to submit it to professional evaluation. They're even bad, fraudulent. I mean, the formation of the letters are incorrect. So, and they paid thousands of dollars for them, multi-thousands of dollars. So it still goes on. It still breaks close to home. And the issue is, how do you get control of it? Well, the issue is you can't. There'll always be those that reproduce and sell fraudulently. But we can try to find out where the scrolls are and secure them. You can go to the Shrine of the Book in the Jerusalem Museum and see these scrolls. You'll see absolute replicas. The scrolls themselves are in hermetically sealed vaults, subject to scholarly research, again, carefully regulated. But they're available, and they're available to look at. There's one closing thing, and we're out of time. So at the end, we'll draw this conclusion.
That said, Israel Hansen
So I'm going to stop there because my time is officially run out. I started on time and I'll finish on time for a change. But if you have questions, I said I can't hear very well. Come up here and I'll talk to you and ask your questions. Thank you much for being here.